Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, an entitled neighbor constantly steals gasoline from my tractor and then has the audacity to threaten me with a gun. They soon learn why you should never mess with a farmer. Let's dive right into the video. The story starts like this. Usually most farmers consider their crops or their cattle as their most prized possession. However, in my case, it is my tractor. My grandfather had bought this tractor for my father when he was passing the farm over to him, and my father then gave it to me when he deemed that I was worthy of taking over the farm. Farming was a profession that held a lot of responsibilities, and knowing that my father trusted me enough to pass on his tractor gave me the confidence to carry on. The vehicle was maintained with the utmost care by my father, which is why it still functions perfectly well to this day. It was now my duty to do the same. As the seasons changed and years went by, the tractor became more than just a machine on the farm. It represented a bond between generations, a symbol of hard work and dedication. Its faded green paint and worn-out tires carried the memories of countless plowed fields and harvested crops. Every morning as the first rays of sunlight kissed the farm, I would make my way to the barn where the faithful tractor stood patiently, ready for another day's of work. The familiar scent of hay and diesel fuel enveloped me, awakening a sense of purpose and connection to the land. The tractor had become my companion, accompanying me through the changing seasons and unpredictable challenges that farming brought. Together, we faced droughts and floods, labor-intensive planting, and tireless harvesting. It was during these moments that I truly understood the significance of my father's trust and the weight of the responsibility I had shouldered. It had never occurred to me that any kind of misfortune would befall my tractor. I naively believed it would stay the same as it always had, despite the fact that my neighbor was a character I had never encountered before. She was the type of entitled person that was stereotypically referred to as Karen. The way she yelled and complained about the sounds that came while farming was easily more annoying than the actual farming sounds itself. To make matters worse, she managed to find and marry another person who was exactly like her. Her husband did and said the same entitled things, but the only difference was that he was much louder. I did not even know it was humanly possible to be louder than Karen. While they had numerous complaints about the entire neighborhood, one of their biggest concerns was the sound my tractor made. Contrary to how they put it, my field is pretty far from their house and the tractor is modified to be less noisy as compared to any other model. There should have been no way they could even hear it, and even if they could, I only used my tractor during the daytime. This meant that my farming should not be affecting their sleep at all, but they insisted that it did. Despite the unwarranted complaints and exaggerated grievances of Karen and her husband, I tried my best to remain patient and understanding. I approached them with a calm demeanor, explaining the modifications I had made to reduce noise pollution. I showed them the distance between their house and my field, assuring them that the sound should not reach their home. However, their entitlement seemed insatiable. They continued to demand that I cease all farming activities, including the use of my beloved tractor. Their persistence and hostility began to wear on me, but I refused to let their negativity tarnish the spirit of the farm and the bond I shared with my trusted companion tractor. What truly broke me was when my tractor began stopping randomly while I was using it. The gas meter would state that it was empty even when I had just filled it the day before. It would usually last much longer. I tried brushing it off, telling myself that's because the tractor is getting old, but my maintenance was impeccable though. I began panicking when this started happening more often and other issues arose with the tractor. I knew something was wrong and it was not my maintenance of the tractor. One morning I noticed the front gate to my farm property had been tampered with. I remembered securing the lock the previous night, but it was open already when I went to buy chicken feed in the morning. I immediately rushed to the security camera footage and I was shocked to see Karen's husband pick the lock as she drove their car inside. It turns out they had been stealing gas from my tractor and putting it into their own vehicle for the past few days. It was clear that the ability to pick locks did not make them mechanics. The way that they extracted the gas from the tractor was damaging it even further. This explained why the tractor was actually getting louder and slower. I went over to their house and demanded an explanation. They flat out denied all accusations and said they would never want gas that was in an old beaten down tractor like mine. I was stunned. I couldn't believe that they came up with such an immature excuse. Determined to find a peaceful resolution, I reached out to the local community and sought guidance from fellow farmers who had faced similar challenges. I learned that they too had faced irrational complaints from Karen and her husband. She seemed to have an uncanny ability to find fault with almost everything happening around her, making life difficult for several neighbors in the community. One of her favorite targets was an elderly widower who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. This Karen took issue with the state of his front yard, claiming it was an eyesore that devalued the entire neighborhood. She bombarded him with constant complaints and threats of reporting him to the so-called homeowners association. However, what Karen failed to understand was the sentimental value of his garden. Despite its slightly unkempt appearance, the garden was a labor of love and a source of solace for him after losing his beloved wife. In another instance, Karen clashed with a family who had recently moved in next door. She voiced objections to the presence of their backyard chickens, citing noise and hygiene concerns. Despite the family's efforts to ensure their coop was well maintained and adhere to local regulations, Karen persisted in her campaign to have the chickens removed. Her confrontations were not limited to property-related matters either. Karen had a knack for stirring up unnecessary conflicts with her neighbors over trivial matters such as parking spaces, noise from children playing, or even the choice of exterior paint colors. Her constant complaints created a tense and unpleasant atmosphere in the once peaceful neighborhood. I always thought the problem would fade away once we gave them enough time and space to heal, but I finally realized that it was time to take concrete actions. Their harassment of the neighborhood would never stop if we did not make a stand. So I decided to place nails all over my driveway. The nails were simply a safety measure. I did not think they would come to steal from me again right after I accused them of doing so, but I had underestimated their stupidity. If they still chose to try and steal my gas and further damage my tractor, this would certainly teach them a lesson. When they got married, Karen's husband brought all his belongings over to her house in a single car. It was a classic Dodge Charger, and he never hid the fact that it was one of his most prized possessions. That car meant to him what my dad's tractor meant to him. I did not think he would do anything to risk hurting his beloved car, but if he did, watching his car tires inflate would heal the wounds I got from watching my tractor deteriorate. It meant much more work for me if they did not show up and I had to remove all the nails on my own, but something told me I should protect my property better and not trust these people to suddenly turn better. So then, in the middle of the following night, I heard loud banging on my door. I groggily opened it to see Karen and her husband standing at my doorway, furious. They began yelling at me for having nails in my own driveway. They did not let me speak at all and told me that they had already called the cops. I could not shut up anymore. I informed her that I have everything captured on my security camera and that I will be taking legal action. Karen's husband looked pissed, seeing his Dodge Charger get severely damaged by the rusted nails I had accidentally pushed him over the edge. Before I could register what was happening, he pulled out a pistol and pointed it straight at my forehead. He continued yelling at me and told me I would not be able to do any of that with a bullet through my head, so I should just shut up. The violent rage in his body caused his hand to move as he was speaking. With a deep breath, I used this to disarm him in one smooth motion. The cops that Karen had called arrived at that exact moment. I explained the entire situation to them and the camera pointed at my door captured the entire incident with the gun. It was clear who was at fault. Both of them were locked up for threatening me, trespassing, stealing my gas, and damaging property. With all of these incidents captured on camera, they had no defense. The entire neighborhood felt quiet and peaceful with them gone. It still took me a very long time to properly fix my tractor, but at least there was no one to damage it any further. And yeah, Ripe Stars, this entitled couple obviously was not as smart as we are. Since we are veterans of Reddit stories, we all know that you never mess with a farmer. Especially with things that are sentimental to them. Either way, if you liked the story, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even drop a comment, because that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much. And the next one is titled, "You Will Hear From My Lawyer." My wife worked at the central switchboard for a group of resort hotels in a tourist area. She had to deal with guests from all of the resorts for all sorts of requests. A lot of them were fine, but there was always a certain percentage of entitled vacationers that seemed to think a good reputation for guest service meant that they could get anything they want. Sometimes it did not even matter what you did to help the guest, they were going to get what they wanted. So this usually involves long, angry rants about how horrible of a person you are and how the company is clearly going downhill if they cannot provide whatever they want, whenever and at little to no cost. It was pretty par for the course when dealing with angry guests. What guests did not know was that there was one line they should never cross, which is threats of legal action. Here is where the malicious compliance comes in. So anytime someone threatens to sue or call their lawyer, there's only one more move the operator can do. Direct all conversations to the legal department. The operators literally have a script that says, "Since you have threatened legal action, all further inquiries must be sent by your lawyer through our legal department." At that point, the caller's account is flagged in the computer system, and anyone else they talk to will give them the same response. Most of them realize after hearing this how screwed they are. Wanna make dinner reservation? Lawyer. Room service? Lawyer. Bell service? Lawyer. Valet parking? Lawyer. You get the idea. Any other hotel-related service across all of the resorts this company owns? Have your lawyer call our legal department. I think it's not just phone calls. I'm sorry, you don't actually have a lawyer and it's Friday night? Have the one you hire call us when the legal department opens on Monday morning. These hotels are part of a much larger corporate entity with a massive potential for liability in terms of money extracted under legal threat. To the point that there are scams on a semi-regular basis by people faking or intentionally injuring themselves for personal enrichment. The company is very profitable and has a sizable, well-experienced in-house legal department. No one will serve them beyond what's the minimum level of service out of caution that it may expose them and the company to further liability. And yeah, ripe stars, honestly, the amounts of times I have seen entitled guests at hotels that make me just shake my head and want to facepalm myself is just outrageous. Honestly, it seems like there are some people that feel like when they go to a hotel, they must be treated like a king no matter what. I guess some people think that hotel employees are below them or something, and that's why they treat them so badly. Very sad state of affairs sometimes. But anyway, let's continue to the next one. This one is another HOA story. A friend asked me to watch her cat for her while she was on vacation. So when I went over to feed the cat, I parked in the driveway, fed the cat and left. One day I went to feed the cat and there was a $25 ticket on my car for parking in the driveway. It was from the HOA, not the police or parking enforcement. There was nothing illegal about where I parked, nor have I ever been told not to park in a driveway by anyone. So then I ignored it. The HOA is now pursuing her for the ticket since their authority only extends to their members. She sent them my info and I flat out told them to take a hike. I'm not paying a fine, and if they don't like it, just sue me. She is upset with me and demanding I pay since she will have to pay the fine. If she had told me her HOA does stuff like that and that I need to park on a guest spot instead, well, I would have. However, I don't feel obliged to pay a fine for made-up rules I was never told about. The law in my state is pretty clear. The HOA has no right to fine me, but their members can be held responsible for the violations of guests. So yeah, ripe stars, let me know what you think about this in the comments. Do you think that OP is the a-hole or not? I'm very curious about what you have to say. Comment number 1 on Reddit said, not the a-hole, if there was a parking rule that she knew about, it's up to her to tell you. Now, if she had told you about the parking rule and you had intentionally violated it, then sure, you should pay. However, you were doing her a favor and apparently broke a rule you did not know even existed. That's not your fault. Let's hope the friendship does not end over $25. Comment number 2, not the a-hole, if she lives in an area that strict, she absolutely should have told you the rules. That is on her. Also, if she can afford to go away on vacation, she can pay a $25 ticket. I'd be flat out embarrassed to demand that of a friend, especially one that was doing me a favor and taking care of my pet. And the next one is titled, Terrible Neighbor Kids. I was working in my office yesterday when I heard loud bangs and splashes in my backyard, followed by laughing. I looked outside and saw my neighbor's kids were on their trampoline throwing fruit from their trees into my backyard and trying to make shots in my pool basketball net. My pool had at least 20 pieces of fruit in it and it was all on the cement. Luckily my dog was not out there because she would have eaten it. I ran outside and yelled, "Stop that right now! Get down from there!" I don't think I've yelled that loud in my life before. I startled them because they didn't know that I was home. One of them started crying while the other said, "I'm telling my mom you yelled at us." And then they took off for inside. My neighbor came out when I was cleaning the fruit out of my pool and asked why I yelled at her children. And I explained to her what happened. She told me, They're just looking for things to do. Their whole summer was taken from them and they were just having fun. And it's my job to discipline them, not yours. I had not really had a whole lot of interactions with this neighbor, and this was probably the most I've ever talked to her. I yelled at them because they were destroying my pool, which now I'll probably have to drain, and they could have broken a window or hurt someone if any of my family were out there. So, am I the a-hole? And yeah, Ripe Stars, what do you think here? Do you think that OP is the a-hole or not? Let me know. Comment number 1, not the a-hole. Hire a pool service to evaluate the pool and what needs to be done and then present her with the bill. Pretty sure this qualifies as vandalism. Comment number 2, not the a-hole. At the mother's words, and it's my job to discipline them, not you. I wish you would have said, so why weren't you? Basically, damaging a neighboring property should not be considered appropriate entertainment for children. Full stop. And the next one is titled Terrible Family. So, sister-in-law is the kind of mom that always has to one-up other kids. She constantly talks about how her kids are smarter, taller, faster, etc. than her friends' kids. She literally bragged about them being more than their friends' kids when they were babies. It was worse when my husband and I had our twins. Suddenly, everything was a competition. That her kids always won, of course. One of my girls rolled over at 4 months, and her son had rolled over when he was just a week old. The twins both took their first steps around 13 months and her daughter was running at 4 months. She did not actually start walking until around 16 months. She even changed the weight of her kids' birth weights, which makes them both heavier than the current heaviest newborns in America. It's so weird that she feels the need to tell such obvious lies, especially to people who know she is lying because they were there when her kids were small. I got annoyed when she went from lying about her own kids to telling me that there's something wrong with mine. The girls are a few months shy of 2 and they are both healthy, on track and hitting their milestones. Sister-in-law has become obsessed with the idea that there's something wrong with them because they are not speaking in long sentences. Of course they are not. They are not even 2. They are both developmentally on track, but she insists that her children were speaking in 5 to 6 word phrases by 18 months. Spoiler alert, they weren't. Honestly, her son is almost 7 and I can still barely understand a word the kid says. My husband and I ignored her, but she took it too far when I got a call from her friend who works in early intervention, who was under the impression that I was very concerned about my children. We talked and her friend confirmed that yes, they are on track and no, there's nothing to worry about. I finally lost my patience there. Her kids are breaking almost every record there is, and that should be celebrated. So we had dinner with my husband's family on Saturday, the kids were in another room, and I decided it was the perfect time to give her my gift, which was a booklet I had printed and laminated called the White Claw Book of World Records. I printed all the supposed milestones of her kid, complete with photos and info of the actual world record holders now that they had been pushed to 2nd place. She flipped through the first couple of pages, went beet red and called me an a-hole. Her husband took it from her and got through the first page before laughing hysterically and asking her why the hell she was still lying. Apparently, it was not the first time that they talked about her lying about her kids. She stormed out but texted me later that night and asked why I had humiliated her when she all had ever tried to do was help me get my kids the help they needed, but if that was how I wanted to treat her then she would stop. So I guess it's a win for me. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I don't know how you feel about that, but I absolutely hate it when people are lying. And I am all for exposing people who are bragging or lying about any achievements they actually haven't gotten. Let me know what you would have done in that situation. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. I grew up not having much, and when I had kids I always wanted to give them the kinds of things I never had. They were not spoiled, I just wanted them to have a good life. I worked hard and got pretty lucky to end up with the job I have that pays me well. I have what some people might call the American dream home, the kind that you see on a postcard with a nice fence and a 2-story house. In the backyard I have a pool and a trampoline that the kids absolutely love. They always want to have friends over so they can play and of course want me to join when I'm not at work. Everything was great except for one problem, my neighbor. This woman is the total opposite of what I had done with my life. She does not seem to have much, but instead of working hard, she just tries to take things from other people and make excuses. I know that some people are not as fortunate as I am, since I grew up in that kind of life. This woman though constantly would trespass when my family would leave to use our pool and trampoline. Honestly, if her kids wanted to be invited over to play with mine, then that would be perfectly fine. Her kids were mean to mine though, and I was not going to force my kids to play with them. So she would just sneak in with her family when mine was gone. Every Sunday we would go and volunteer at a soup kitchen so she knew when we would go out and not be home for a while. I was tired of it and decided to put a big fat lock on my gate to keep them out. It seemed to work for a while until one Sunday we came home to see that the lock had been broken off of the gate. I was first worried about robbers and had my family stay in the car while I looked. It turned out that my neighbor had thrown a party in my backyard and about 15 adults and a bunch of kids were just using my pool, jumping on the trampoline and making a mess. I was angry and started telling everybody that they had 5 minutes to get off my property and anybody remaining would be arrested for trespassing. That got their attention fast and most of the people ended up running right out of there while the neighbor took her sweet time. About an hour later, the police showed up at my door and it turns out that Karen had called them. They said that the neighbor was pressing charges against me for assault and started to actually put me in handcuffs and read me my rights. I was trying to explain to them, but they did not really seem to care because I was a large man that had been accused of hurting a child. My wife luckily ran in with our security camera footage and begged the police to at least look at it before arresting me. I guess they saw the panic on our faces and decided they would watch the tape while I was sat down still in cuffs. On the video, you could clearly see the neighbor and her husband coming up to my gate with bolt cutters and destroying the lock. Then setting up for a party and guests arriving. Then the normal stuff before I showed up and kicked everybody out. They did not know what exactly to make out of all of this, I don't know why because it was in front of them, and decided that they would talk to both me and the neighbor together. As soon as she saw me, she started yelling, "Neighbor, that's him, officers! That's the man that hit my poor innocent child for no reason!" "Officer, ma'am, I just want to get some statements about what happened before we do anything. You say that he hit your son and hurt him? Does he need medical attention?" "Neighbor, no, he doesn't need medical attention. This man just needs to be in jail for hitting him." "Officer, okay, we still need to take a look at the child and where he is injured before we can move forward." Neighbor seems reluctant but brings her son outside and tells him to show the officers where he has that horrible bruise. It turns out that he has a small bruise on his ankle that is common when you're on the trampoline and land on it not right. My kids get it all the time and never complain that it even hurts. It was clear to the police that this was not from me hitting him at all. "Officer, the other issue at hand is that we have video footage of your husband breaking the lock and all of you trespassing on his property." "That's a lie. We were invited to have a nice little afternoon with them," the neighbor said. The officers obviously did not believe this because they could see the video and told me that I was not going to be facing any charges, obviously. On the other hand, neighbor and her husband were going to get in trouble for what they had done while I was away. She was only given a warning, but the husband ended up getting in a little bit more trouble. Because he broke the lock, he was also charged with vandalism. Looking more into who he was, it turned out that he was on parole and doing these things broke his probation. That meant her husband had to go back to jail and she was left with a warning to stay away from my property. She knew that she couldn't do anything because without her, the kids would end up in the system instead of with their parents. I could see the boy knew that what his mom was doing was wrong and they were a product of their environment. They had to pay me for a new lock and the police finally left after getting us to sign a bunch of paperwork and give them a copy of the footage for legal purposes. Neighbor had moved on to giving me the dirtiest looks every single time that our paths crossed. She did not dare to say anything to me and it seemed the happier I looked, the more annoyed she got. I made sure if she was in view to put a huge smile on my face like I was constantly having the best day of my life even if I wasn't. The pool ended up being a little too hard to maintain, so we sold it and instead got a nice swing set for the backyard. The kids love it and honestly I did too because it was the childhood I wished I could have. When I would swing with my kids I could see over the fence at neighbor and how she looked so angry at me. It was satisfying because I knew that being in that kind of place sucks and the two ways to handle it are like the way she did, where you stay miserable. Or the way I did, where you make the best of it and try for a brighter future. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.